I'm back here now, and we have a special anniversary to celebrate today. This is the 5th anniversary of Gray Park's anniversary of doing his Troubadour. And Gray just happens to be behind the camera today, so congratulations, Gray, on 5 years.
Thank you very much.
Now let's find out what all this Irish history and St. Patrick's Day is about with Jane Curtis this morning. Jane, welcome.
Good morning. We're finishing out the Irish month on the 31st day of something Irish. And it's not St. Patrick's Day anymore, but we're still going to talk about St. Patrick, Irish history, and just feel Irish. And we've had some little snatches of Irish music here.
Good, yeah. Good.
I thought we would maybe just touch on the high points of St. Patrick's life and what went on, and then we're going to take some interesting illustrations and link them in, showing the period of history, what was going on then.
And what was that period of history?
Oh, well, it's the 5th century, A.D.
Okay.
The accounts differ on whether he was born in 387 A.D. or whether he was born around 400 or a little bit later.
They didn't keep records that closely then, did they?
Well, they did, but the trouble was that more than one often tuned in there.
Oh,
and so you had, and if it wasn't in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, even in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and of course this was Ireland,
right.
So it's barely mentioned. I think it's not mentioned much at all. But he was born in, let's say, around 400 A.D., and he was not Irish. He was not born in Ireland. He was born in Scotland, across the water from there, and he came from an upper-class family. His mother was a close relative of a Catholic priest in Gaul, and of course the Roman Empire already was exposed to Christianity. His grandfather, I don't know which grandfather it was, but his grandfather was supposedly a Catholic priest, and that is a little not exactly certain, but she was some close his mother was some close relation, for sure, of a Catholic priest, Saint Martin. He became Saint Martin in Tours in France. So he was in the upper classes there and living in an area on the west coast of the island of Britain. And this was a very crucial hinge moment because the Romans were about to officially leave Britannia, to abandon their province. Things were going too hot for them elsewhere. And the year 409 is the year officially given for their departure from England. So just as he's born, things are changing a lot. They're no longer part of the Roman Empire.
Okay, I didn't realize that had happened.
Well, he's still referred to sort of as a Roman Briton, the way so many people were. They were high class. They spoke Latin, possibly something local, but they spoke Latin. They were educated in terms of the day, and they were just, in fact, maybe some of them were Roman citizens, I think. But he, at the age of 15, he was captured by pirates. The seas were not safe in those days. He was captured by some kind of Celtic pirates. Sometimes they say Irish, sometimes they say Scottish, and I guess apparently it was the Irish who came over and got things going in Scotland at the beginning. So this is all a little bit murky. But here we have this young man anyway, who is a well-brought-up young man of a good family, and he's captured by pirates. The pirates sell him to a Druid priest over in Ireland.
Okay.
And for the next 6 years or so, he tends sheep for his owner, and he has lots of time on his hands, as you can well imagine. And he was apparently literate before that in Latin. Well, he learned Celtic, local Celtic tongue, which was a great thing for his future. And he also did a lot of thinking, and he did a lot of pondering, and spiritual things became more important for him. He had visions and so on. So after 6 years, they all agree on the fact that he was there for 6 years. And he and some others there got together and decided they would leave. And he had a vision. You need to do this, break out. So they got to the coast. They weren't terribly far from the coast, but they got a boat one way or another, had the boatman take them over to England, to Britannia, which took 3 days.
Oh, really?
And they were put ashore in some place that he describes later as a wilderness.
Okay.
And this was in his so-called confessio that he wrote later, which was not a confession of anything. It was just like a
tale.
kind of an autobiography.
Right.
But so they wandered around in this wilderness, quote unquote, for about a month. 28 days is a figure I saw, and they are starving. They think, well, this is it. We've had it. And lo and behold, he prays, and lo and behold, a herd of of wild boar cross their path, and they're saved from starvation. That somehow had weapons or something where they can kill this wild boar. So he's saved, and he wasn't Christian yet, of course, and Christianity was not really too much in existence there, but of course they were aware of it, and through his mother's relatives, certainly he was aware of it. So he looked a little bit more into these religious matters. He pondered, and finally he went over to France and he studied more, and he became a Christian.
Okay.
So he studied in France, or in Gaul, I should say. He studied in Gaul, became doctrinaire pretty well. He was ordained over in France as a priest, a Roman Catholic priest. And a few years later, when he was in his late 20s, the Pope, so it was Celestine at the time, the Pope sent him off to Ireland as a missionary and apostle. And people were being sent. St. Columba was sent around that time somewhere. And off he went back to Ireland and had a terrible reception because the Druids were not taking this lying down. They had a powerful priestdom amongst the Druids. And he decided to move up the coast a little bit to where he had been held prisoner. And he actually went to his former owner and bought his freedom, ransomed himself, as it were, because he probably wanted
So make it legal.
A free hand, yes, whatever it was. And then he started roaming around in Ireland and doing his job, converting people. And he claims to have converted thousands of people, which may be a little exaggeration. But a couple of miracles occurred. One of them was that they had regular warfare in those days amongst these religious people. And what he did was fight firmly against this. And they came at him. Somebody raised his arm to kill him with a sword, and the arm froze.
Oh.
And this was a popular motif, having parts of your body freeze if you did something wrong. And so he was exonerated from that. Well, eventually he became a bishop. And in the course of becoming a bishop, there was a trial. His peers amongst the Catholics there tried him, and it isn't stated exactly what for, that there was some kind of impropriety, but that got over that. And he went on with his work. Now, presumably, the Shamrock and the Virgin Mary come into the story here, because in converting people, the triune, the triple deity, Shamrock, 3 leaves, a wonderful, wonderful icon for that.
Right.
So that's allegedly how that got in. And the religion that the people had before there was many gods. It was almost like shamanism and nature things. But the mother goddess was in charge of everything, as it was in many early societies, because women bore the children. And one time they didn't know how that happened.
Right.
But even after it did, they remained matriarchal. But by linking the mother goddess up with the Virgin Mary, he convinced a lot of people that times were moving along, and this was the thing. So he gradually, as he grew older, he became much more much more stricter. He wore a hair shirt, for example.
Oh.
He traveled around all the time. His headquarters, so to speak, were at a castle in Armagh. He became Bishop of Armagh, city in the north there. And the rest of his life, he just moved around, kept converting, kept presenting an example, a wonderful Christian man. How much of this is tradition, how much is real, who knows?
Right.
Because after he becomes a religious, of course, other reports are coming in, things about it. But he unquestionably was a strong figure, and he took hold of the imagination of the whole world. We may.
Well, isn't there a legend about him getting rid of the snakes or something like that?
There is a legend, and that's all it is.
A legend. Okay.
Now, when you look back originally, there were human beings in Ireland by 10,000 BC, and there a lot of work been done on that. At one time, it was heavily glaciated. At various times, has gone on and off. It was connected to England and/or the continent, or both or all three. And as the North Sea leveling went up and down, and the English Channel opened and closed, there were changes. But the Romans, of course, meanwhile had taken over Gaul, the province Gallia, and they were in close touch. And of course, then Britain became a province of Rome.
Right.
Ireland never did, but the Irish, of course, were of interest to the English, and they were in touch and all of that. But I thought now we would look at some pictures of things, such pictures as I can find that illustrate some of the things that life was like there, when St. Patrick was doing his thing, and things that affected him. And we may say a little bit about his worldwide fame later on.
Right.
But please, if we could look at the first picture. This is Ireland. It looks like a teddy bear, doesn't it, kind of from the side? So you'll see
yes,
that
it does. I never thought of that.
It's a smallish island, but it's intersected by a lot of minor mountains, no Alps or anything, but valleys and so on. So it tended to develop regionally, clanishly, like Greece, like so many other places did. And you see it was heavily indented on the coast there, which led to some isolation in communities. But we picture Ireland then, and of course across the Irish Sea to the east there is the big island of Britain. And if we look at the next picture, this is an interesting picture. Now the Celtic world, around 400 BC, this would be around his birth date. The Celts had moved out of an area down, the Caucasian area, and it wasn't an invasion or a huge hordes moving the way it has been somewhat with the Latin Americans coming up here, or the Syrians flocking, or people flocking out of Africa. It wasn't like that. It was more of a gradual, just a trend westward. I guess more in some ways like our settling of the West. It wasn't just one mass movement.
Right.
But this, of course, was a much different thing. It was a huge folk migration. And you can see that it went over Europe. Actually, I think it went closer to the coast, too, than that. But it went by Spain, and another branch of it, which isn't shown here because it wasn't occupied, but another branch of it went out through the Mediterranean, and the Gibraltar and up the coast. And they knew very early, ancient Greeks knew about Cornwall and the fact that there was tin. And we went through the very Stone Age and the Metal Ages, and they knew about that, and they were up there. So this wasn't entirely new to them. But the Celts then, the traditional story of that, which is, I read parts of it in Middle English, old documents there, that they came up to Ireland and they found people living there on this eastern coast of Ireland, and they said, we're travel worn and we're looking for a home, and could we please settle here with you? And the Irish, which had sort of a primitive system of kings at that time, said no, because there's barely enough here to support us. And it's true, Ireland was not that opulent a provider. But they said, I'll tell you what, if you will go across the water here, there are people over there, you go settle with them. And then these folks said, well, all right, we'll do it. But they said, we haven't brought any families with us. Could we please marry some of your women? would you or would they be willing to go over there? And they said, all right, you can do that, but it's got to be matriarchal. And I guess Scotland was matriarchal too for a long time. So over they went. Well, by the time St. Patrick came along then, in around 400 BC, the Celts had just flown into there, and the whole area had become Celtic on a basis of the originals who were there before the Aboriginals. So it's a rather interesting background, I think. But you had this deep Celtic background to it, with all of its good sides and some of the bad sides. They tended to be a little warlike in some ways. The religions, the Druids and the Catholics, as I mentioned, were physically fought each other a good deal of the time. But if we go on to another picture now, please. There are no good likenesses of St. Patrick. And all of the early things that I've seen, even a couple of centuries away, no two share any common features.
Oh, really?
So people were just making it up, I think. But this one, anyway, is a lovely window. And in one hand, you see in the right hand, doesn't show up well because of the color, I think, but that's a shamrock that he's holding there.
Oh, that he's
so
holding
very
in his
early
hand.
on, the shamrock came up. And the color green became more important. But in the 17th century, in the 1600s, that really became important. The shamrock was adopted. The Irish had more of a feeling of nationalism, of one country.
It drew them together then.
And the British tried ever after, but under Elizabeth, for example, there were nasty slaughtering campaigns over there, tried to dominate Ireland, but they never quite succeeded in doing that. But St. Patrick, now in this one, if St. Patrick's grandfather really was a Druid priest, and there's no reason why he should have lied about that, here we have a Druid priest wearing all these flowing robes, and what he is holding there, the thing with the parallel lines, is a primitive musical instrument that was in use then. And please, if we could hear, we have a sound bite that I'd like to play, if we could have a little snatch of that, what this music would have sounded like. Do you hear it?
I can't hear it.
No, I can't hear it. Maybe that didn't come through. Well, it's a very delicate type. Oh, there it is. There. You hold it up, and you
Sort of a string instrument.
you hold it up. It's a wooden sort of a frame, and down the middle you have these few strings. And when you play it, then in this case they're using a bow. In some cases, there's a picture of it. Yeah, see, there he is playing it. And this is a very simple thing, very easily made, and not requiring any volume really. But they played their simple tunes. Of course, music hadn't developed. Music as we know it hadn't developed, been organized, so to speak. It was later. But this is the kind of thing St. Patrick would have heard. And I wouldn't be surprised to know that he had played some sort of instrument like this. They didn't have the violin sort of instrument. They probably had things that you blew on, but nothing like the way they did later. But this is a gentle little sound, and I think a little ear visit to that period of time. Yeah. And this is called, it's popular amongst particularly the Welsh, amongst the Gaelic, the Celtic people. So now another picture, and we will see another aspect of life then. The next one will, yeah, all right. Now this is the remains of a rather strong-looking castle, a fort. And these things, this may have been a century or so later, but they were building with stone.
Oh.
And we'll see some other uses of stone. They were able to do that. So what they had was, they could have had a sort of pitched warfare. Anytime they disagreed, you could retreat to your fortress. And of course, they've lasted. They were strong, very strong things. The next picture will show us some Celtic warriors, Celtic soldiers, and here we have their metal shields and their bunch of blondes. Some were
Blonde.
the Celts were typically blonde, but of course, they were intermarried. Now, another one here, this is a stone circle, and this will remind you of Stonehenge and some of the things in France, and all through these Celtic areas. And this one, as you can see, is clearly designed for lining things up, placing of the stones. So they had some degree of knowledge of nature and of how to use nature to reckon by setting up. They noticed, in other words, the sun doesn't come up the same place all year long and go down the same place. So this was part of it. And as an educated person and in the church, he would probably have had at least a smattering of that. No, let's go, to go to that little tin cup again. Now, I'm cheating here a little bit because this is not an original tin cup there, but it is tin, and they had it in that time because they were metal workers. They could obviously work metal, and they had all this tin down here in Cornwall, not all that far away. So this is the sort of implement you would have had. That wooden top, I venture to say, might be a later thing, but of course they had wood. And another interesting aspect about the wood, originally Ireland was pretty well covered with forests. And when we talked about environmentalism, we talked about how they'd been stripped from many parts, the whole Mediterranean area and around. And this was largely to provide wood for fires which would be hot enough to smelt metal. And yes. I think that's an indication there. There's no question that the island was virtually covered with trees, and that they're gone now. More than half were gone. I forgot some period in history. They realized that at least half of them were gone. So that's another factor of it. St. Patrick would have had metal things. He would have understood probably about those things. And I doubt if he would have been worried about the trees, because we went way back to Mesopotamia, of course, in the BC, and showed that the kings there were worried about it because they realized the effect it had on the land and the fertility of the land. But so there's one more aspect. Now another thing here will show us a greeting card. Now,
really?
This greeting card is going to bring us up a little more modern. Because the St. Patrick and his story and his existence just captured the imagination of the entire world. It is today the single most observed, not really holiday, but the single most observed day of its kind in the entire world.
Really?
I saw greeting cards, for instance, there was a Joyeux 17 Mars, happy 17th of March in French, and all over, especially in the diaspora, because the Irish left in droves in the middle of the 1800s, and that was the famous potato famine.
Right.
And the potato famine was caused by some kind of a pathological factor that they only came to grips with later and realized, and it was spreading, it was getting to other places. It was not only in Ireland, but you had, at any rate, Irish all over the world, and sometimes not treated nicely, and sometimes just sank in. But on the flag here, I wanted to show you this picture. This is the flag that has been the correct flag for about 100 years, since about World War I, but there are no shamrock on it. I took the one that had the shamrock.
You put the
because
shamrock
I wanted to show that. But the green stand, let's keep that a minute. The green stands for Ireland, which, as I say, was identified, the color identified it as of at least the 17th century, if not before. On the right, what's this orange doing here? This represents the division of Ireland and the Protestant north of Ireland. That sticks with the English, with the British. The center, some say it's the fact that they're coexisting on the same island. They didn't coexist too well, tragic stories. And even at the time of the World War, the Irish Rebellion, another one, but they seem to have reached some kind of a way of getting along and staying. But celebrations of it, now it's of course a legal holiday in many places, but the celebrations are very cute reports of that.
Okay, we're down to 1 minute.
Down to
so
1
share,
minute.
share something about the celebrations, and then we'll have to move on.
Well, they're done all over the place. In many of the provinces of Canada, they have whole days. And here, and people have complained about its being too commercialized and
Right.
so on. But they've also complained that it gives the Irish a bad name because
Well,
it's associated with alcohol.
Yes, it is.
And very interestingly, in the past, they were not allowed, if St. Patrick's Day fell in Lent, they were not allowed to drink or eat certain things, just like, you know, Lenten restrictions on that day. Otherwise, that didn't apply in the north of Ireland, however, it applied only in the Catholic part. And then later on, they passed a law in 1927 about not being able to sell liquor on St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's
And of course, you could stock up the day before probably, which people
I'm sure
did.
they must have.
In the movies, we have plenty of rich examples of the Quiet Man, for example, with a little Irish guy. You know, the horse knows to stop when it passes the pub, you know, that kind of. But to some extent, it was considered a pretty wild thing. But it spread at any rate. And St. Patrick performed, of course, some useful functions in Ireland in trying to restrain people and in helping with greater education for them. And setting them a good example, and being a beacon, being something that people could coalesce around,
Right.
was an
Sort of
important
drew
thing.
people
Yeah.
together. Thank you, Jane.
So-
That was fascinating.